in the photographs. How people use this town when suddenly to walk across, I live up on Flamingo, right? And to walk across 8 lanes of traffic to get to the grocery store is really quite a task for me, and I'm fairly able-bodied. Right? But for a lot of people that are not quite so able-bodied, how do you even cross the street to get to the grocery store in this place that we've made? Particularly when the weather's going to start getting warmer and warmer in the next few months. I get the sense I'm going to be running a lot of grocery errands for my neighbors in the next few months. And then there's the younger crowd, and what happens as they start to use this place, as they start to form friendships, as they start to develop their education through the place that they live in, right? And what is this world behind these guys that we have created for them, right? They can't drive yet, so welcome to the automotive city, right? They don't have a lot of money yet, so welcome to this retail environment, right? They're not tourists, they live here, so welcome to this tourist place that we've created, right? But you look in their eyes and you can still see the dreams that they have. You look in the eyes of the younger kids and it gets a little more problematic. I have no problem with the sort of paper boxes that sell porn and strippers that'll come right to your room, but do you need to put the box at the height of a 4-year-old? That seems really kind of curious to me. And what kind of world are we creating for these folks to grow in? Though at the same time, we do have sort of, you know, clowns for the young kids and other sorts of activities for the older kids, and snow on the mountains for the recreation sort, and indoor snow for the other types of recreation. And it really is sort of a rich and robust place that we've created here. So I'm going to go on to the next project, because right now we're still pretty much looking at the world and trying to assess exactly what this place is that we're operating in. I did a studio a couple years ago at Virginia Tech, and I started with a simple hypothesis. And the hypothesis was that architects place objects in the landscape in order to fill in that sentence any way you want to. Right? But the essential sort of kernel of the hypothesis is that we place objects in the landscape. We tend to focus a lot on making objects, but my argument was that actually the placement of that object out in the world has a lot to do. Place as verb. The actual action of changing that world that you're setting the object into has a lot of repercussions. And if that is true, we should be able to learn quite a bit about the place we live in through placing, through the actual act of placing objects in the world. And it really doesn't matter if that's true, and I could be wrong on this, it's just a hypothesis. If that's true, we should be able to do that with the dumbest, stupidest, most banal, most everyday form you could ever find. And so we decided to take my favorite, the white folding chair. It's a fairly common, fairly everyday object. Some of you are sitting on a chair that is not too distant cousin from these folding chairs. Right, this one was all metal chair, no plastic in these guys. And we had 40 students. There were 30 freshmen and sophomores in a foundation program and 10 thesis students. It was one of those crazy vertical studios that was missing a few rungs on the ladder. But I had a small little army of 40 people that all wanted to learn something about place, learn something about placemaking, learn something about architecture. And so we went out, and the task was to go out, take your chair out, place it in the landscape in a way that it starts to tell a story, that it starts to create a space. Why is this chair facing in this direction off this promontory, off this precipice? What is the view in that direction, right? And why is it not facing towards the photographer? It's not a portrait chair, right? If that thing were turned around, you're meant to sit in that chair to get your portrait taken. Instead, that place can be very conspicuous, right? The order in this landscape is not obvious. Can we actually place these objects in the world in a way that starts to help us learn about the world in which we're operating? And maybe learn a little bit about that placing. So being good, sort of rebellious students, the first thing that they all wanted to do is block people's paths. I don't know how really to create a better world, but I can get in somebody's face and maybe that will have an impact, right? So immediately overstepping the bounds. And what was great was there were a whole bunch of placements all around campus that first day that were trying to get in people's way, and people just went around it. They really didn't care. Had absolutely no effect on those people or on the space whatsoever. And everybody came back after the first day completely discouraged. Oh, this isn't going to work. We had no effect whatsoever. Well, keep plugging away, keep working on it. Maybe you got to think about it slightly different. So we started slowly and surely to get a little bit more sophisticated placement, right? Up on the pedestal there, up on the plinth, right? And what does that tell you about that place that they have created, right? Robert Frost gets to a fork in the road. Which way does he go, right? Maybe it's not the path less traveled. Maybe it's the one that has the white folding chair at the end that is conspicuously placed in a way that might reward your journey for heading in that direction. It might not, but it might. And I like an architecture of might. I like an architecture that might produce something. I kind of like that. Right? It was great. The placement could actually call attention to the vastness of the landscape. It could also call attention to the tightness of space, the sort of claustrophobic landscapes that we've created as well. White folding chairs are a little bit trashy, right? And so there were a lot of placements that tried to call attention to its resemblance to some other trashy elements in the landscape. One of the things we found quite quickly was it wasn't entirely just the placement of these objects in the landscape, it was also the way they were recorded. And the way we started to look at that placement, this is the exact same placement, this chair down here, in a way that calls attention to the great big sky, the chair up there that calls attention to the great big landform down below it. It's actually the same placement, it's just two photographs of that same placement. But they are read very differently. So how is it that we communicate our placemaking in the world, and how does that start to tell a different story? Became a great sort of subtext to our discussions as we continued to go out in the world. These things are light, you can throw them, you can demonstrate that, you can hit people over the head with them. They become really sort of wonderful. I have to say, this one was sort of sculptural. This is a student getting frustrated, right? And that's okay, right? Studio should be a place where you can get frustrated and express yourself and still contribute to the greater project that you're working on. I have to say, I never noticed that these chairs had black rubber feet until I saw this photograph, right? My own shortcoming, that I'm looking at 40 white folding chairs for a week, and I didn't notice they had black rubber feet on them until I saw them arranged in that way. Right? I didn't get the reading that that student had hoped that I would get through that sort of abstract sculpture, but I did learn something about the world in the process, and for me that was a pretty good day. You can actually stand on these chairs and change a light bulb. Right? They actually have sort of cousins in the world, right? In the way they fold and the way they work. It turns out there's other types of chairs in the world, and perhaps there's a kinship between these white folding chairs and other types of seating out in the world. We had a lot of people that became really interested in camouflage for some reason, right? Trying to hide the placement of the chair, right? I tried to put it in somebody's face and that didn't work, so maybe I could hide it and that will be more subtle in another way. It was also about, you know, this whole discussion that it's not about the object, but it's the field in which the object sits is important. Camouflage becomes a really interesting design problem because you have to have a very sophisticated understanding of the ground, of the field. You have to know the properties of the place that you are placing your object in if you are to blend that in, right? How do you take men with guns, deer in the woods, and blend those two things together in a way where one is camouflaged from the other? I think camouflage becomes sort of an interesting side quest to this as well. And again, we had many, many eyes working on this project, so we all ended up learning something new about the area where we lived, the place where we lived. One thing that was really curious about this project was other students started to do it. You know, it's funny, I would walk around with a camera all the time, and I always felt really geeky. I felt really conspicuous having a camera because I had one of those big cameras with the big lens. Try walking around campus with a white folding chair under your arm and try not to feel, you know, at least self-conscious at a little bit. So it was very, very surprising to us that other students who weren't even enrolled in our class started obtaining their own white folding chair and started producing sort of examples, and they wanted to participate in this exercise as it kept growing. We had faculty, we had members from other programs that weren't even studying architecture. These white folding chairs started showing up all over campus in various spots. You know, some of the compelling ones are where they start to become more social, right? That the chair, your object in the world can take on a performative nature, it can take on a passive audience nature, right? Perhaps our architecture can do that same sort of thing. Perhaps our architecture actually gets in sort of little neighborhoods and little social interactions with other forms that have been placed in the landscape to serve other purposes as well. This one I like because these slides always elicit a chuckle from the crowd, right? And there's something I think really empowering here that architecture can actually elicit emotions, right? It can be humorous, right? It could be sad. It could be angry. It could be witty, right? It could make Matthew smile uncontrollably over here. I just find that really interesting as a lesson to think that our architecture might have other possibilities once it gets out there in the world. And that our designers have a sense of humor and can actually express that through their work. A lot of investigations into this big box retail world. Again, another example on the right of the vastness of the landscape as displayed through the tiny placement of this chair out there, right? In other cases, a little bit camouflaged, but the vastness of the indoor landscape, as Gordon Cullen calls it. There is a chair out there in the Super Walmart parking lot somewhere. We actually had a student took their chair to Walmart to photograph. They were really interested in the visual clutter and chaos of the inside of the big box retail. And so they wanted to capture that, and the way they wanted to capture that was through bringing their chair into Walmart and studying the different elements of the inside of the big box retail. And they did this for an hour or two. Nobody asked them a single question until they started to leave the Walmart, and they were arrested for not paying for their white folding chair. This was really great, and the student was smart enough to say, "But you don't sell white folding chairs here." I couldn't possibly have. I brought it myself. And they said, "Nobody brings their own chair to Walmart. What are you talking about?" They said, "No, you sell folding chairs." And they went back and they sell tan, gray, and black, and they do not sell white folding chairs at Walmart. And so begrudgingly they let the student leave, but I think they probably noted something down on his permanent record to keep an eye out for the student at some point in the future. I like that the student was aware enough of the chairs that were being sold at Walmart to be able to get out of a particularly sticky legal situation. So you would start seeing chairs all over campus. We did this for several weeks, and it became sort of eerie. You'd be walking down the street, and there would be one folded up and chained to a bicycle rack, right? Because somebody didn't want to be embarrassed when they went into chemistry lab carrying their chair. No, we have chairs. You can leave your chair at the door. Oh, okay, so... But it does call attention that it folds, it stacks, it's multiple. It has other sort of roles in the world as well. This is a great sort of example of the formal arrangement versus the event arrangement, right? You can create sculpture, you can create geometric shapes and form and space, but as soon as those chairs become used, it becomes a different sort of collection of form and space plus event that creates that place. We had people writing short stories about white folding chairs. If you were in a set of mystery, where would that white folding chair, right? If a white folding chair shows up in the first act, something's going to happen on the third act when it comes up again. We had people writing poems about white folding chairs. We had one English program was doing it as assignments. What do you guys want to write about this week in composition class? I keep seeing these white folding chairs all over campus. What's up with that? Okay, write about it. Work your way through it, right? If you're a writer, you write your way through your confusion in the world. If you're a designer, you have other ways of operating in the world to help understand that confusion. In some cases, you could actually, through the placement, call attention to the material properties of your chair. In other cases, you don't actually even need the chair to create that place as well. We had one of the photography studios in town started selling photographs, very artsy black and white photographs of white folding chairs. This is kind of, that's when I knew it was getting out of hand. When we got approached by the student literary magazine on campus to do an entire issue on the white folding chair, with poems and short stories and photographs and other sorts of reminiscences about, oh, that was the year of the white folding chair. But you would go to a bar at night after a long night of studio, and some kid would be trying to get service at the bar, and he'd be standing on his white folding chair because that was a good way to get service in a crowded bar at 2 in the morning in Blacksburg. This is the cover of the student literary magazine. It's actually somebody put their white folding chair on a Xerox machine, and the Xerox machine wasn't big enough to copy it, so they had to keep sort of warholing it together to get enough parts to make that collage, and that was selected through the editorial board to be the cover of that year's literary magazine.